There's a very specific kind of silence that happens after someone gives a narcissist everything. And I mean everything: their time, their loyalty, their forgiveness, their patience, their entire emotional world, only to watch it get treated like it never mattered at all. It's not the loud silence of shock. It's quieter than that. It's the silence of someone sitting in a room, replaying years of their life, trying to understand how they went from being someone's whole world to being completely disposable, seemingly overnight. If you've ever lived that silence, you already know it doesn't just hurt. It rewires something in you. And today, we're walking through exactly what happens, both to the person who gave everything and inside the mind of the narcissist who threw it away, because there's a pattern here that almost nobody sees clearly until they're standing right in the middle of it. Because here's what makes this particular kind of hurt so uniquely disorienting. It's not just betrayal. Betrayal, on its own, is painful, but at least it makes a certain kind of sense. You can trace the shape of it. You can point to the moment things went wrong. But what happens when a narcissist hurts someone who gave them everything is different. Because it doesn't just break trust, it breaks logic. The math stops adding up. You gave more, and somehow you got less. You loved harder, and somehow you got punished for it. And that contradiction, the sheer senselessness of being hurt in direct proportion to how much you gave, is exactly where we need to start, because understanding why this happens changes everything about how you heal from it. So let's walk through the 6 things that consistently happen in these situations, because once you see this pattern laid out clearly, you will recognize it instantly, whether you're living through it right now or looking back at something from years ago that never fully made sense until this moment. The first thing that happens is what I'd call the devaluation acceleration. And this is one of the cruelest parts of the pattern because it's counterintuitive. You'd think that the more someone gives to a narcissist, the more valued they'd become. The opposite is true. The more you give, the faster the devaluation tends to happen, because to a narcissist, your generosity doesn't register as love to be cherished. It registers as a resource to be extracted. And once a resource becomes fully available, fully certain, fully guaranteed, it stops being interesting. There's no more chase, no more uncertainty to keep them engaged. What made you valuable in their eyes wasn't your loyalty itself. It was the fact that your loyalty was still being earned. The moment you gave everything, unconditionally, you unknowingly removed the very thing that kept their attention hooked. And that's why so many people report the exact same devastating timeline, that the more they gave, the colder the narcissist became, almost as if generosity itself was being punished. The second thing that happens is entitlement replacing gratitude. This one is subtle at first, and it builds slowly enough that most people don't notice it happening until they're already deep inside it. In the beginning, when you first start giving, there's often at least a performance of appreciation, a thank you, a moment of acknowledgement. But narcissists have a well-documented pattern of adjusting their baseline expectations upward every time you meet them, until what used to be a generous gift becomes simply the bare minimum they expect from you. The extraordinary things you do get quietly reclassified as ordinary. And once that shift happens, gratitude disappears entirely, replaced by a kind of entitled expectation, where instead of being thanked for your generosity, you start being criticized the moment you fall even slightly short of it. You went from being appreciated for giving so much to being resented for the one time you couldn't give more. The third thing that happens, and this is where it starts to get genuinely painful to witness, is the search for a replacement source. Because narcissists are, at their core, dependent on external validation to regulate their own sense of self-worth. And once one source of that validation, you, has been fully extracted and no longer offers the same excitement or supply, the search begins for the next one. And this doesn't always look dramatic. It doesn't always look like an obvious affair or an obvious new best friend. Sometimes it's quieter, a slow redirection of attention and energy towards someone new, while you're still technically in the picture, still giving, still trying to figure out why things feel different, without yet realizing that you're being slowly replaced in real time, right in front of you, while everything on the surface still looks the same. The fourth thing that happens is the retroactive rewriting of your value. This is one of the parts that causes the deepest, most lingering damage, because it doesn't just affect the present, it reaches backward and poisons the past too. Once a narcissist has decided to devalue you, they don't just stop appreciating what you did, they actively start reframing it as something smaller, more calculated, or less meaningful than it actually was. The sacrifices you made get reframed as things you did for your own selfish reasons. The support you gave gets reframed as controlling or excessive. Years of genuine, generous love get quietly rewritten into a story where you were somehow the difficult one all along. And if you've ever found yourself, after everything, somehow apologizing to them, or wondering if maybe you really were too much, too needy, too demanding, that's not an accident. That's the fourth pattern, working exactly as it's designed to work. The fifth thing that happens is the discard, and this is usually the moment most people associate with the whole experience. But by the time it actually happens, the truth is, the emotional exit already happened long before. The discard itself, whether it comes as a sudden disappearance, a cold detachment, or a dramatic blow-up that conveniently makes you look like the unreasonable one, is really just the final visible step in a process that's been unfolding quietly for a long time. And what makes this stage so uniquely painful is the timing. It rarely happens when it's convenient for you. It tends to happen once the narcissist has already secured what they need elsewhere, once your usefulness has been fully depleted, or once maintaining the relationship starts costing them more effort than it's worth. The discard isn't really about you at all. It's about their calculations. And understanding that distinction is one of the most important and most difficult realizations someone can come to after living through this. And the sixth thing, the one that ties every other pattern together, and honestly the one that deserves the deepest look, because it explains why so many people who gave everything to a narcissist walk away not just heartbroken, but genuinely questioning their own reality, their own worth, even their own sanity. That sixth pattern is where things get really important to understand, because it's the piece that determines how long the damage actually lasts. That's exactly where we're going next. The sixth thing that happens, the one that ties everything else together, is what I'd call reality erosion. And I want to slow down here, because this is, without question, the most damaging part of the entire pattern, more damaging in the long run than the devaluation, more damaging than the discard itself. Reality erosion is what happens when someone who gave everything starts to lose confidence, not just in the relationship, not just in the narcissist, but in their own perception of what actually happened. And this doesn't occur by accident. It's built slowly, deliberately, over the course of the entire relationship through every single one of the 5 patterns we just walked through. Because think about what's been happening the whole time. Your generosity got reframed as ordinary. Your reactions to being mistreated got reframed as overreactions. Your history together got quietly rewritten until you weren't even sure anymore which version of events was true, the one you lived or the one you were told you lived. And by the time the discard happens, by the time you're sitting there trying to make sense of how someone you gave everything to could walk away so easily, so coldly, you're not just grieving the relationship. You're grieving your own certainty. You're asking yourself questions that should have obvious answers, and finding that you genuinely don't trust your own conclusions anymore. Was I really that generous? Or am I exaggerating it in my head now? Did they really treat me that way? Or am I remembering it worse than it was? Am I the villain of this story after all? That confusion, that genuine inability to trust your own memory and judgment, is not a personal failing. It is the direct, engineered outcome of everything that came before it. And here's why this particular piece of the pattern is so important to name clearly, because once someone understands reality erosion for what it actually is, something incredibly powerful starts to happen. The fog doesn't lift all at once, but it starts to thin. Because the moment you can look at your own confusion and say, this confusion was not an accident, this was the result of a slow, sustained pattern designed to make me doubt what I know to be true, you take back a piece of ground that the whole dynamic was built to take from you. You stop asking what's wrong with me and start asking what actually happened here, which is a completely different question and a far more accurate one. Now, I think it's worth pausing here and asking the question that probably crossed your mind at some point during all 6 of these patterns. Why does this happen specifically to the people who gave the most? Why does generosity, of all things, seem to attract this kind of treatment instead of protecting someone from it? And the answer, painful as it is, comes down to something fundamental about how a narcissist experiences other people. Not as fully separate individuals with their own needs, their own limits, their own inner world, but functionally as extensions of their own supply. And the people who give the most loyal, the most patient, the most emotionally generous, are, from that lens, simply the most efficient sources available. It was never a coincidence that you were targeted or kept close or eventually devalued in proportion to how much you gave. It was, in the most clinical and uncomfortable sense, exactly what your generosity made you, in their eyes, useful for. I know that's a hard thing to sit with, but I want to be really clear about something, because this is where a lot of people who've lived through this take the wrong lesson away from it. The lesson here is not that your generosity was a mistake, or that giving so much made you naive, or that you should armor yourself against ever loving that fully again. That would mean the narcissist gets to take one more thing from you, the part of you that was capable of that kind of love in the first place. The actual lesson is something much more specific and much more useful. Your capacity to give wasn't the problem. Where you were giving it and to whom was. Because here's what almost nobody tells you in the aftermath of something like this. The same generosity that got exploited by someone who was only capable of extracting from it is exactly the thing that, directed toward someone capable of actually receiving and reciprocating it, becomes the foundation of a genuinely healthy relationship. The problem was never the depth of what you were willing to give. The problem was that it was being poured into a container that had no capacity to hold it, let alone return it. And once you understand that distinction, healing stops looking like closing yourself off and starts looking like something much more precise. Learning to recognize, much earlier, who is actually capable of meeting you where you were always willing to meet them. This is also where I want to address something important for anyone listening who is still in the middle of this, who hasn't reached the discard yet, who might be somewhere in that quiet devaluation phase, sensing that something has shifted but not fully able to name it yet. If any part of what we've walked through today feels familiar, if you've noticed your generosity being met with less warmth over time instead of more, if you've caught yourself rewriting your own story to make yourself the difficult one, I want you to trust that discomfort, not the doubt they've cultivated in you, the original discomfort, the one that showed up before you started questioning it. That instinct was accurate. It's usually the only part of this entire process that was never distorted. And for anyone on the other side of this, anyone who's already lived through the discard, already sitting in that disorienting silence we started with today, I want to leave you with this. The fact that it hurt this much is not evidence that you loved wrong, or gave too much, or were somehow foolish for believing in someone who turned out to be incapable of valuing what you offered. It's evidence that you were capable of exactly the kind of love that makes a life worth living, real, generous, unguarded love. That capacity did not break because it was misused once. It's still there. It was always the most valuable thing in the entire relationship, and it still is, waiting for somewhere safer to go. If any part of this hit close to home, Know that you're far from the only one who's lived through this exact pattern, and there's a lot more we can unpack together as we go. Make sure you're subscribed because we go deeper into this every single week.